views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and editors and journalists and writers and photographers and filmmakers, anybody putting stuff out in the Bronx. In our second segment today, we've got a guy who is incredibly talented. He's actually a comic book writer and one of the best in the nation, of course, from the Bronx. And we'll spend a little time with him. But to get started, we're going to talk to the economics and transportation reporter for the Mott Haven Herald. It is David Westenhaver. Nice to have you with us, David.
Thanks for having me.
David, you're new. You're here for in the Bronx and in the city for the great Craig Newmark Journalism School. A little background, you were telling me earlier, you're from Portland, Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you like the idea of coming to New York for school?
Yeah, I've liked the idea of coming out to New York since I was a kid, so I'm very happy to be here.
You know, one of the things that is always interesting to us in the Bronx is, you know, when people come here, what's their reaction? So what was it that made you say, gee, I live in Portland all the way out there, but I wanted to come to New York City?
There is just so much going on here that I like the pace of the city. No matter what it is that you're interested in, New York is going to be the center of the country for that thing. So there's a lot of stories to tell here, and that's why I wanted to come here specifically for journalism.
What interests you about journalism? When did you get started? When did you say, you know, I like this?
I've loved writing since I was a kid, really since I was in elementary school. But I think just over the past few years, I decided it was something that I wanted to do as more than just a hobby, something that I wanted to get into professionally, telling other people's stories, helping them to put their story into words and share it with the world. So that's what I love to do most, and that's why I'm really enjoying what I'm doing right now.
I particularly like the fact that, and we'll talk about news and we'll talk about what you've already written for the Mott Haven Herald in a moment, but I particularly like the fact that you like the craft and that your website, which is, I guess, davidwestenhaver.com, is that what we're talking about, has you presented as a writer of anything. So is it news specifically that drives you, or you just like the fact that news happens to be another really cool way to do some writing?
It's a little bit of both. I love writing. It's definitely the form of storytelling I'm most experienced in. When I first started writing semi-professionally, I was doing all kinds of freelance work from email marketing to website copy and really anything I could do just to get some writing on my resume. But that was all just part of the process into getting where I could write for journalism.
So that's the ultimate goal. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that because, of course, as you know, I've been doing news and talk for a very long time. I understand that if this is the only thing you do, you won't be as good at it. And if you're a writer and you do all that other stuff, just very quickly, and then I do want to talk about a couple of things you wrote about in the Bronx. This guy, Simon Whistler, you apparently have written his videos. He gets hundreds of thousands of clicks. So just tell me about who he is and what you do for those videos.
Yeah, Simon is kind of a YouTube news producer, not just news, but he runs about 10 different YouTube channels that really tell stories almost as a mini documentary series.
Issues. He deals with issues, it seems.
Yeah. He has a wide variety. So I got started working for him, writing for 2 channels called Mega Projects and Side Projects, where we tell stories about big infrastructure projects. I did one about the New York subway system before I moved out here. And then another one called...
I got to go check that. I got to check that out. That's interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yep. And yeah, so
you know what would be interesting is for you to do that now after you've been around a little bit and you got stuck a few times and it took forever, and then sometimes it was particularly fast and you were like, oh, what was I worried about? I got there.
Yeah, I have a whole new perspective on that.
I'm sure you do. So those are the kinds of things that you wrote the script for him to. You did the research. That's really great work. So let's talk about the Mott Haven Herald. Now let's be clear to viewers. David has only started school, like I guess in August sometime.
Late
So
August.
you haven't had it. You're going to be writing stuff. This is a way of introducing you, because when you come back, then we won't have to do all this groundwork to establish who you are. So the story that was interesting to me, because nobody's written about it in a while, is this notion of the Borough Jails Plan, with jails all over the city, but in Bronx particularly over there on Concord Avenue. What do you know? What'd you find out?
Yeah, so there hasn't been a lot of news or updates on that story for a while, until in late August. The Department of Design and Construction released a notice of intent where they described, they gave us a few more details about what the jails are going to be like. They mentioned that all 4 of them will have 884 beds, which is a lower number for the Bronx branch in particular. That number was higher before. They also stated that each jail is going to cost between about $1.5 and $1.8 billion. They laid out the process for finding the companies that are going to design and build those jails. And then the last thing they did was shed some light on their new pricing policy that's designed to keep the costs low for the entire project. They called it a guaranteed maximum price policy.
Well, that you haven't been around the Bronx that long. That is music to our ears, because I think of that water treatment plant. You may not know about it, which was built in the North Bronx, said to be under $1 billion, and it came in at the end at $4 billion. So so I understand that. So I guess the message to many Bronxites who did not want the jail in that spot, or is the message to those people, the fighting is done, that's where the jail is going. In other words, there were others who said, the jail should be closer to the courthouses. There's some logic to that. But do you get the sense that this is it? No more questions, no more dialogue. Here's the plan.
That seems to be the case at the moment. I know that a lot of people in Mott Haven aren't ready to wave the white flag right now.
They'll never accept it. Yes.
Yeah.
And I understand that.
Yeah, so they're still working hard on having their voices be heard. This is something that public officials said from the beginning, that they wanted to get the community involved in the process, and a lot of people in the Mott Haven community in particular feel like they were able to speak but not really heard in terms of the location of the Mott Haven.
Didn't matter what you said.
Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like you do it with a kid and you let the kid cry. Okay, You're done now. Now we're still going to grandma's house. So what is the timing? I saw timing was like still in the future. Obviously Rikers has got to be taken apart. What do you have a sense about the timing for that?
So the timeline is still set for about 2027, possibly 2026, for when Rikers will close down and those new jails will be ready to open. The process of even choosing the firms to design and build the new jails, that's going to be probably about another year. It's a pretty drawn out process. There's 3 or 4 more steps along the way before they reach that point.
Well, so it's at some point, David will have gone through graduate school, will have completed graduate school, and then we'll be writing about this on the other end as a professional journalist somewhere. And you'll think of the education you will have gotten as a result. So you're going to be writing about a lot of stuff about economics and transportation. Boy, wait till you roll up your sleeves and we get into you about the bicycles and the bicycle lanes, and all that stuff. So there's plenty to talk about. I'm sure we'll have you back. One of the things which has come up, to me, it's almost like a no big deal. It's in a way a no-brainer, is that they wanted to rename a street for Derek Jeter around Yankee Stadium, and you wrote a brief story about that. It just seems logical, incredibly popular. What do you know about that?
Yeah, it's something that the 161st Street Business Improvement District is spearheading. They were really heavily involved after Mariano Rivera retired with getting River Avenue named Rivera Avenue. So this is the corner right outside of Yankee Stadium obviously Derek Jeter is, right up there with the most beloved Yankees of all time. So it was a no-brainer for them. They love Derek Jeter here in New York. I loved Derek Jeter as well. Even growing up a Seattle Mariners fan, I had some pain in my heart when Derek Jeter.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing from a guy from the other side of the country.
Yeah.
I mean, the Yankees have no limit to the number of heroes who could have a street named after them.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, you mentioned Mariano Rivera and Derek Jeter. Those are only recent. I mean, you could go as far. I mean, do we have Whitey Ford Avenue? I mean, do you have Roger Maris Avenue? I mean, so anyway, that's just my thought about that. But if people want to do it, so they're talking about a section of 161st Street.
Yeah, it's a corner where it intersects with Rivera Avenue now. So they're calling it the crossroads of the baseball world, where Rivera Avenue and Jeter Street cross.
There you go. I know that the people at the Yankee Tavern are all involved. Listen, if you and I were a lot older, we could have gone in there one day and sat down, and Babe Ruth would have been sitting next to us. That would have been pretty interesting. Yeah. Anyway, David, so David Westenhaver, we're going to see and read more of him. Are you working on anything now that we should start looking out for?
I have an article coming out shortly. This one's more Hunts Point focused. The Hunts Point Forward Plan is they're putting together a kind of a vision for the next 10 to 15 years in Hunts Point. They had a back to school fair the other day where they solicited feedback from the community. So that should be coming out in the next day or two at the Hunts Point Express, which is another paper that I'm writing for. And besides that,
that's actually a really big story. I mean, again, you don't have the perspective of years like I do. We've been talking about that stuff for a very long time. No question about it. So you expect that to come out sometime this week, next week?
Yeah, that'll be out sometime this week. And besides that, just working on as many, business, economic, or transportation stories.
Right.
Looking for all sorts, talking about the Bruckner Expressway, Sheridan Expressway.
Listen, there's tons here. People in the Bronx know exactly what they are, and we're going to look for you at the Mott Haven Herald and the Hunts Point Express, and we'll certainly have you back here to discuss some of those issues that you unravel for us. David Westenhaver. Excuse me, Westenhaver.
Yep.
Sorry. Got it. Thanks for joining us, and we expect to have you back. People can check him out at David Westenhaver.com, and also certainly at the Mott Haven Herald. Thanks, Dave. And we'll take a short break. When we come right back, I told you we're going to have a great guy, great talent, a comic book writer who has just won a major literary